Moments ago, about an hour or so ago, we have seen now 4 victims who have been brought to this hospital. The last person we saw seemed to be a police officer, but it is not confirmed, and we do not know whether any of these victims sustained any injury that came as a result of the attack on the World Trade Center yesterday. I'm joined here by Tom Collier, who is with the University of Miami Medical Center. And Tom has been working as a volunteer, can tell us about some of the outpouring of emotional support that you've seen.
Well, the community in New York has been unbelievable, as always. Not only the national chains of food like Duane Reade and Starbucks and that kind of thing, but the local residents, people coming in and helping out any way they can, not only in products and foods, but also in time. All night long, we've had every shift covered. We're getting food to the officers and to the nurses, to the doctors. We have set up 9 coffee stations throughout the hospital just so they don't leave the area and stay with the patients, which is where they really need to be.
Can you see whether it's actually making a difference?
It's making a difference, and it's, our whole thought is if we just get 2 hands free inside by doing what we're doing, then we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that's what we're trying to do.
Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The hospital officials here say that they will have a press briefing at 6:30 just a little while from now, and of course we will keep you posted on that. I'm Michael Oakley reporting live from Lower Manhattan.
Thank you, Michael. We want to go back to Garrick Utley, who's at the New York Bureau with a view of the skyline. Garrick, we've been hearing stories about things being reported on New York radio, something about people calling for help on their cell phones from the World Trade Center?
We've had those reports through the evening, indeed from city officials, that they have received some cell phone calls from those trapped in the rubble. Now, we're not quite clear whether it's in the rubble of the Twin Towers that came down or buildings around it where people are trapped because of debris, and also because a 3rd building at number 7, the World Trade Center, also collapsed yesterday, late afternoon. So we're not sure where those calls are coming from, but yes, some messages have gotten through, and to the extent that the rescue effort can pinpoint where they are, they're certainly going to be going after them today.
Garrick, do you know whether they're saying how seriously they're hurt or how much danger they still feel they're in? No,
we've not heard anything since the news conference last night held by the mayor, Mayor Giuliani, and other city officials. They mentioned some of these phone calls. They're being very tight-lipped. Officials everywhere do not want to give out any information that can raise hopes too much or dash them too much. They're just waiting for events to unfold. I'm sure, though, that during the course of this day we'll be getting more information about that.
Sure. Garrick, do they think that these are credible calls?
Well, how do we know for certain? Certainly a prankster could do it. That would be the worst, the bleakest, the darkest, dirtiest joke, if you will, if anybody tried to pull that stunt. But they believe they are credible. That's what they say. They're acting on that information. How many they are, we simply don't know. We do know, of course, earlier yesterday, even before those towers collapsed in rubble here, many people employed and working in their offices in the Twin Towers were calling friends and families, describing what was happening. And we were also told that by one of our colleagues at CNN that he had learned that one man called his wife and he knew that he was trapped right at the top and he wasn't going to get out.
Well, we will continue to hear these stories. Garrick, right behind you in your shot, we can see that it is just about daybreak there.
The sun is coming up to the east, and we want to take a look at one of the at downtown here, as you see the lower part of Manhattan and that gaping, what can we call it, void, a hole where the Twin Towers used to be. There's still a lot of dust, some smoke, but that's a mixture of dust and smoke that's in the air there, and it's probably going to continue for some time because the rescue effort itself will keep kicking up the dust.
Speaking of that, and we have some pictures of the rescue effort that's continuing right now, that would be a difficult area to access even for regular traffic, would it not, let alone trying to do some of this massive recovery that's taking place now with the heavy machinery.
When we look, you're absolutely right. When we look at downtown or lower Manhattan, we see these modern, sleek skyscrapers. It's Wall Street, the financial district. But actually, anybody who's visited realizes this is original New York City. This is where the first settlers landed. This is where George Washington was inaugurated as our first president, just a couple of blocks from those Twin Towers some 200 years ago. This is a part of town with not a grid system of streets, but tiny little streets and lanes along which they built these giant buildings filled with hundreds and thousands of workers. So in the best of circumstances, it's a perpetual traffic jam down there. Now, of course, even with traffic and pedestrians cleared away and the people having fled, you've got to move in this giant equipment. And look at the cars that are down there. Look at the debris you've got. How do you maneuver in this space? Right there we're seeing a shot. That's along one of the broader avenues running north-south. But around the World Trade Center, that's just a catacomb, just a maze of tiny roads and streets.
Garrick, in taking a look at this shot, we get a sense also of the New York Police Department's rescue crews trying to move through that area. Are you hearing whether the rescue crews themselves are hearing the voices of people who are still alive, still trapped under there? And are they giving you a sense of how long it's going to take to get anybody out?
Well, several questions. First, no. No estimate yet as to how long it's going to take. It's going to be days and weeks. That is absolutely certain. Question number two, any survivors? Yes. The Port Authority, that's the regional government institution that runs the World Trade Centers, or ran them, runs the airports, the bridges. It reported that 3 or 4 of its security officials had been pulled out of the rubble. Presumably they're on the fringes. They heard voices. They were able to recover those men who were wounded or injured, but they're said to be, they're going to be all right. We heard an earlier report last night that the special teams that were brought in, special handlers with dogs trained to look and smell and sniff out humans, dead or alive, were going through the rubble, and very quickly the dogs indicated they had no scent. They couldn't get any scent. They were disoriented. Why? Because of all the dust in the air. The dust was interfering with the dogs, even with their sensitive sense of smell, to do their job. Perhaps today it'll get slightly better, we don't know, but that's another obstacle that stands in the way of the rescue effort.
All right, Garrick Utley, thank you for being our guide through this madness that is now Manhattan. We'll be checking in with you periodically. Carol?
The toughest hour still ahead, Vince. Right now, let's go to Kelly Wallace. She's standing by at the White House. Kelly, question on many Americans' minds. What sort of action is President Bush going to take, able to take? What are some of his options in responding to this crisis?
Well, definitely, as you heard President Bush say last night, Carol, he will say that the U.S. government is going to do everything it possibly can to find those responsible for these terrorist attacks. Mr. Bush also saying, though, that they will draw no distinction between those responsible for the attacks and those who harbor them. Now, as for a sight setter here at the White House, you might expect, and that is the case, flags at half-staff all around the White House complex for what is likely to be a very somber day here. President Bush, as you know, quite the early riser, usually up by 5:30 a.m. This day expected to be no different. He will begin his day getting an up-to-date briefing from his national security team on the latest concerning the investigation, as well as the search and rescue efforts. He's also invited a group, bipartisan congressional leaders, over to the White House. And at that time, Mr. Bush will come before the cameras again. His message will be that the U.S. government is doing everything it can to assist in the disaster areas in New York, Pennsylvania, and then, of course, at the Pentagon here in Washington, D.C. He will also say that the work of the government goes on, and again, that the U.S. will do everything possible to find those responsible. Last night, the president went before the American people, a very grim-faced U.S. President George W. Bush, in what must have been obviously a very difficult moment for the president. He said that those responsible for what he called acts of mass murder were hoping to frighten the nation into, his words, chaos and retreat. But Mr. Bush said they have failed.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world. And no one will keep that light from shining.
Now, U.S. officials publicly and privately right now refuse to say exactly who they believe might be responsible for these attacks, but we do know that senior administration officials briefed members of Congress last night. Sources telling my colleague CNN's John King that those senior officials saying they are confident that the evidence is pointing to affiliates of accused terrorist Osama bin Laden. Also, those senior officials saying that they are going to take their time to make sure they find out exactly who is responsible and then, of course, hold them accountable. Carol?
Kelly, you have seen both sides of the coin on this story. You're obviously in Washington now, but you were in New York yesterday. What was that like?
Absolutely. Images that none of us will really ever forget. I was actually about 15 blocks from the World Trade Center complex when the first plane hit one of the towers and then went out on the streets. I think the images that really come to mind are people sort of leaving the downtown area in a very orderly manner, but calling on their cell phones, look of disbelief as people watching not one but two towers come down. And also, I talked to so many firefighters. It was an unbelievable situation, Carol. You couldn't use cell phones, really. You could barely get a call out. And so as I was holding my cell phone trying to get calls out, firefighters would come up and say, "Can I use your phone?" We said we couldn't get a call out, but we would take their names and numbers and then call their relatives or their loved ones. Obviously, they were very concerned to let their loved ones know that they were okay, but clearly firefighters were concerned about their colleagues. So many people saying that they had gone in, those firefighters had gone into those towers as the people were coming out, and many people that we talked to very concerned about the firefighters who, of course, went into those buildings, and, of course, what happened once those buildings came down.
That's
Carol?
right. Still 300 firefighters unaccounted for. How did you get out of the area?
That was another difficult thing because, as you know, airports were closed. Amtrak was down for most of the day. Bridges and tunnels going into Manhattan were down. But by late in the afternoon, around 4, 5, 6, Amtrak started running, at least around 5 o'clock, started running trains out of Washington. So there was some opportunity to get out. A lot of commuters who needed to get away. Obviously, there were ferries taking people from downtown Manhattan over to New Jersey. Again, it was sort of a very orderly thing. People were moving from the downtown area, getting away from the scenes of destruction, and obviously very patient. A lot of crowds at Amtrak at Pennsylvania Station in Manhattan. But I can tell you, too, Carol, how this hit so many people on the train from New York to Washington. There was one woman who had a friend of a friend who was on one of those planes that obviously went down. A man in front of me had a friend of a friend who was in an office above where one of those planes hit. So you can see how many lives these tragedies have affected.
And Kelly, what a strange situation for you to be in. I mean, you're a trained journalist. You're taught to be dispassionate. You're told time and again that you're not to be a part of the story. And yet here you were in a situation where you were almost part of the rescue operation and trying to give technical support and trying to flee as well with the crowds.
Yeah, I mean, Carol, as you know, it is impossible not to be affected by the scenes of firefighters sort of sitting on a curb, their heads in their hands, wondering, you know, about their colleagues. So it's hard to be affected. What was great is that we could be of some assistance. I mean, how happy some of these firefighters were to know that we just talked to their wife, or my boyfriend's mother was able to get through, and that they knew that their loved ones could then call all the relatives so that at least they had some comfort. But of course, you know, there's so many people who just questioning whether or not their loved ones are still alive, and it's just impossible. You just do the best you can, try to help, and get the story out. That was a major frustrating thing, Carol, though you couldn't get a cell phone to really work, so it was very difficult to call CNN New York or in Atlanta to convey what we were seeing, but that information was getting out throughout the day.
Right. Well, your instincts served you well, and I'm glad you're back safe home and now hard at work. Thank you very much. Kelly Wallace, reporting live from the White House. Vince?
We want to remind you we are just minutes away from a press conference that will be taking place at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City. We'll get that as soon as they begin. But right now, with all due respect to the victims of this horrible tragedy, we want to see how the ramifications will affect now business in this country and worldwide. We go to David Haffenreffer, who's in New York, and he has that story. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you, Vince. As you might imagine, Lower Manhattan, the heart of the financial community. All financial markets obviously closed in the U.S. today. Even trading of U.S. stocks in London through the electronic trading firm Instinet have been halted. Let's take a
David, we have to interrupt you now, David. This is the press conference at St. Vincent's Hospital. We're taking that live.
FAL, Associate Director of the Trauma Center here at St. Vincent Catholic Medical Center. Let me first briefly update you on our numbers and what has happened during the night, and then Dr. Westphal can give you some information on our paramedics, our ambulances, what they've been doing, and what's been happening in the trauma center. Since 9:04 a.m. yesterday morning, St. Vincent Catholic Medical Center has received 361 individuals through our emergency room trauma center. 90 of those individuals have been admitted to St. Vincent's Manhattan. 4 of those individuals have died. 58 of the individuals who have come to St. Vincent are paramedics.